it's up to you to open this panel and present for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you for the moderation. Much appreciated. Good afternoon, everybody. Huge pleasure to be here. I am extremely looking forward to the polylogues with so many of the luminaries that I deem of the most importance and prominence in the field. So really looking forward to the debate after this very short talk. This is what Midjourney told me should represent a new paradigm coming out of a period of liminalities. Now, I'm not sure if it's correct, but for sure it did a better job than what I would have done if I had to sketch a new paradigm. So I'm going to talk about metamodernism, and mostly I'm going to talk about this paper I've written with Brent Cooper. Brent is one of the major experts globally in metamodernism. It was a huge pleasure collaborating with him. I have learned a lot. But I will also talk about how my thoughts have developed after we published this paper, and specifically I will talk about how metamodernism can be useful for us in futures studies and foresight. So, quick background before I introduce you to metamodernism. Actually, this is something that has been belabored a few times, so I'm not going to spend so much time on it. The background is something we all know, right? We're facing great progress, great technological advancements, but at the same time, we're still facing sharp social and wealth inequalities. We're still facing culture wars, overdetermined climate change, and I would also add a lot of political instabilities, right? So I'm not going to belabor the point. All these problems are interrelated, and we can talk about a meta-crisis, right? In France, I think what you call it is the problématique, if I'm not wrong, right? Some people say it's wicked, but anyhow, this is almost like the premises of this conference, so I'm not going to spend so much time on this. The interesting point is that future studies and metamodernism have similar, but yet complementary responses to the meta-crisis. So, how does future studies address the meta-crisis so far? Well, complex problem, complex solution. We should design normative scenarios and then extract policy recommendations from those scenarios. Obviously, I am simplifying, and I hope you allow me to simplify a lot here, okay? I just pulled a reference that is very significant in normative futures. That's a special issue by Floyd and Slaughter on the journal Foresight on descent futures. Very interesting special issue. If you haven't looked at it, go check it out. And the subtext of all that issue is basically this, right? Normative scenarios and then prescriptions, policy prescriptions based on that. There is this same subtext in a lot of other futures work. But the response of metamodernism to the meta-crisis is a bit different. The response of metamodernism is, hold on, behind the many interconnected problems we're facing, there is actually a deep ideological problem, right? There's a rift of ideologies that we're seeing. So we need to reestablish that meta-narrative, that ideology, before talking about policy solutions, or even along with policy solutions, because a lot of metamodern concepts, metamodern policies are designed to walk towards that meta-narrative, actually, as we shall see. And specifically, the lack of this grand narrative can be seen very clearly in the debate between two big value systems, modernity and postmodernity. Now, of course, we can also see pockets of pre-modern value systems, right, as we are witnessing in Israel, or even, if you will, pre-human value systems. I'm not denying that, but in the political sphere, majorly what we see is a debate between modern and postmodern value systems. So, in this context, metamodernism is this. Very jargony definition, apologies for the jargony definition. It's a new collective value system that incorporates, contextualizes, and tries to transcend all previous value systems while resolving the conflict between them in an integrated whole. And of course, it focuses mostly on modernity and postmodernity. But of course, it's about all the value systems put in context. Now, I want to stop for a second and say two things. One thing, because metamodernism is so ambitious, What I'm saying in this talk about metamodernism is inherently a very little part of it. It's almost like embarrassing if I were to speak with somebody who is an expert in metamodernism to give this talk. So if you are an expert in metamodernism in this audience, I apologize. I'm simplifying tremendously. Okay, I'm just like turning on a lamp in front of the sun. Apologies. But on the other hand, if you don't have a notion, like a clear notion of modernity and postmodernity, just by raise of hands, I want to ask you if you do or do not, because if you don't, then I will have to try the impossible and provide a definition of modernity and postmodernity in 30 seconds before we move on. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult for you to follow. So how many of you are not super clear on what a modern value system and a postmodern value system are? Okay. So because it's 30%, I'm going to try the impossible, and I'm going to try to define modernity and postmodernity in 30 seconds. So if modern value systems are all about a never-ending faith in progress, technology, and growth, right, at the expense of unsustainability, at the expense of marginalization, and at the expense of oppression, that's the cost of modernity, right? If that's the case, then postmodernity is a critique to that, a backlash to that. And postmodernity is a group of different philosophies and value systems that criticize progress, criticize technology, and shows us the limits of science, but yet they also have a cost. So those value systems are at the expense of cancel culture, of believing pleasing falsehoods, right? And extreme political correctness, and eventually a decay in society. So I hope that was roughly on point. And now we can move on, right? Of course, metamodernism had many false starts, right? So value systems and philosophies that tried to go beyond postmodernity had already been proposed. That there was simply postmodernism, and there was, and still is, altermodernism. There was, and still is, transmodernism. And perhaps in future studies, the most well-known are post-formal thinking, and perhaps even above all, is post-normal times and the recently developed concept of the transnormal. What I like about metamodernism, and what I guess most metamodern people like about metamodernism, is that metamodernism tries to put all of that as well in context together with postmodern and modern value systems. So it's a very ambitious, right, very ambitious framework. That's why there's a lot of be critiqued about metamodernism. That makes it so interesting. So there are two types of metamodernism, actually, and only one is of a particular interest for us in Futures and Foresight. One type of metamodernism is metamodernism in the arts. And this kind of metamodernism is basically telling us that there is a new structure of feelings, a new art form that is emerging, right? Metamodern artists or metamodern art pieces, right, are not modern. They're not postmodern. There's something beyond it, right? There's a bunch of people saying, hey, you know, if we look at sculptures, if we look at movies, if we look at paintings, they actually cannot be categorized as modern paintings or art forms or postmodern paintings. They're going beyond. So there is a new collective feeling in the art that is coming, okay? And then there is a second kind of metamodernism, which is metamodernism in the social sciences. And metamodernism in the social sciences is actually normative and prescriptive on how to solve the meta crisis. So obviously the one in the arts is not prescriptive. It just notices, hey, there is a new structure of feelings. The one in the social sciences can be even defined political metamodernism because it proposes solutions to the meta crisis. And obviously this is the one we want to focus on today. And if we talk about political metamodernism, we have to talk about Hansi Freinacht. Hansi Freinacht is perhaps the most seminal, the most pioneering, influential figure in metamodernism. And because metamodernism wants to go beyond, you know, a step further, Hansi Freinacht is actually not a real person. He's a fictional author. He's a pen author for two very brilliant guys, social scientists, Daniel Gortz and Emil Eggener-Fries. I hope that I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Apologies, guys, if I'm not. Okay. And Hansi Freinacht wrote a lot of books about very detailed, very specific, and that's the real key here, very detailed policy recommendations to solve or to go beyond, to transcend, however you want to say it, the meta-crisis. So now I'm going to give you a couple of examples of policy recommendations that Hansi proposes, which you may or may not agree with. It's not the point. It's more about they're really interesting, you know? So first policy recommendation, how to address economic inequalities. Economic inequalities, the debate over this topic is a very politicized debate, and it's rife with modern, postmodern clashes, right? There are a lot of public intellectuals saying we should address the problem by solving inequalities of opportunities, right? And then there's a bunch of public intellectuals saying, no, we should address it by looking at inequalities of outcomes. So it's a very modern, postmodern clash. There's almost no solution in the public sphere about this. And metamodern thinkers, such as Hansi, say, hold on, the problem is more complex than that. Inequalities are multidimensional in kind, right? It's not just economic, it's also social, psychological, emotional. It's a very wicked problem. For example, if you're young and if you are low in socioeconomic status, you're probably going to be very sad looking at the Instagram presence. I'm using an example that is very, let's say, up to date. The Instagram presence of those who are young and higher in your socioeconomic status. And so that will make you even more depressed for apply for a new job and less likely to rank up in your socioeconomic status. So it's a complex problem, right? Multidimensional. And Hansi says, let's walk towards a solution by establishing a ministry. It's a very ambitious, very all-encompassing proposition. Let's establish a ministry that massively collect data on inequalities of different kinds. And then based on that data, so it's very science-driven, based on that data, it will propose educational programs of different kind at the country level, at least, such as inexpensive healthy lifestyles, strategies to combat work stress, emotional counseling, and so on. So one thing that Hansi doesn't say is that this will also contribute to producing a lot of new jobs, by the way, which I like as well. Second policy problems that I want to bring to your attention is the one about gender mistreatment. Another crazily politicized issue. And apologies if what I'm going to say sounds offensive. I'm trying not to be. I'm trying my best here. But the core of this is gender a social construct, right? Does toxic masculinity exist? Now we also hear about toxic femininity as well. So very politicized, okay? And metamodernism, political metamodernism says, well, to a point, gender is a social construct. There is certainly one thing to be acknowledged. It's partly socially constructed, but clashing, destroying the patriarchy is not going to solve the whole problem. So again, the solution is a multidimensional set of policies. And what Hansi suggests is, let's collect data massively collect data on gender mistreatment of different kinds, not just women, but also other genders. And then based on that data, design programs to better relationships between genders, to educate people about respecting boundaries, about secure attachment styles, and so on. So all these are terms that if you are familiar with psychology literature, it's based on science, right? It's a very scientific-driven approach. So this, again, can be something that you may or may not agree with. I'm not even sure I agree with this myself, all right? It's just very interesting to see these policy recommendations. And finally, the most ambitious policy of all that I want to bring to your attention is Hansi proposes direct solutions to address the meta-crisis, to address the lack of a narrative, okay? And that, to me, is something that I'm not even sure I agree with, all right? I'm just going to want to be very clear with you, but it's just very interesting to talk about this. And the solution to address the meta-crisis for Hansi is, again, let's collect a massive amount of data, same story, right? Let's collect a massive amount of data on different worldviews, on different meta-narratives that people have, which, by the way, meta-narrative is one key topic of our field, right? See the connections. And then based on that data, let's walk towards a new meta-narrative for our world. Again, very ambitious, a lot of questions that can be raised here, right? Who's going to establish that meta-narrative? What is that meta-narrative? It sounds almost like we're in a totalitarian situation here. Right? So you may or may not agree with these things, and even the fact that Hansi proposes that all these things are applied together raises even more questions, right? Is it even possible? Right? But what I think is important is that these things are the things we should talk about more and more in our field. I'm not saying these policies are correct in any way. I'm saying that it's useful to talk about these propositions. So let's reflect on how metamodernism can be useful for future studies, okay, very quickly. First of all, I think it's very useful to compare this with postnormal times. And I believe, and I might be a bit direct here, but I believe that metamodernism is superior to postnormal times when it addresses the meta-crisis for two reasons. The first reason is that postnormal times, which is the thing we have in future studies that is closer to metamodernism, that tries to transcend the meta-crisis, right? Wants to do that, but is very vague, very, very vague in its policy recommendations. Perhaps because of the difficulty in providing such recommendations, but at least Hansi and political metamodernism tries to do that, right? So the detail here is something we could look at. And secondly, in my view, and it's written in very detailed fashion in this paper, post-normal times wants to transcend postmodernity, but yet falls back in postmodern ideology. It's almost like falls back in the trap. And the reasons why it does it, it's explained in this paper, so if you're interested, just go and check it out. So in short, if we look at the roots of future studies, those roots are in postmodernism. They are in social constructionism. They are in post-structuralism. Think about the CLA, right? So there is a risk here, as Marcus Anthony says in his article for JFS, very clearly, there's a risk that future studies cannot escape postmodernity, because in the debate between modernity and postmodernity, it falls back on postmodernism, right? It doesn't manage to transcend it. So by looking at metamodernism, futures maybe can actually transcend the meta-crisis. So that's conceptual point of view that we can take out of it. And second, more practical. What is the utility of metamodernism for applied foresight work? Because at the end of the day, we're all practitioners as well, right? A lot of people I see in the room are academics. I know you. So what's the application of metamodernism for applied foresight work in organizations? I see two research streams here. The first research stream is the explicit creation of metamodern foresight methods. And actually, these methods might be implicit. So in other words, there could already be, I'm saying, metamodern foresight methods, right? It's just about bringing them to the explicit level. And those methods are methods that help organizations plan for the futures, that transcend ideologies and pursue revenue in a sustainably and politically non-divisive manner. And these are some of the signals I see of this. Methods that I believe are already metamodern. It's just about saying so. Hey, it's explicitly, deliberately metamodern, right? Dialectical waves of change by Dujardin. The Sarkar game, the concept of the Sadviprai in the Sarkar game is deeply metamodern, in my view. My own work, The Futures Triangle 2.0, Anthony's work on harmonic circles, and of course, integral futures, perhaps above all, right? All these methods are, in my view, metamodern already. So it's just about making it explicit. And secondly, how about we update the postmodern organization? There is a paper, very famous paper by Robert Chia in 1995. Extremely influential paper, and that paper is long waiting for an update. What is the metamodern organization? It's about time, right? To help other organizations, right, to think about policies that can help other organizations, again, to transcend ideologies and pursue revenue in a sustainably and politically non-divisive manner. And there are signals of this as well, I believe. All the work on call-outs to woke organizations by Foss and Klein, Wright, Thomason, Waldman, and perhaps the book about why managers matter, which sort of critiques the postmodern critique to hierarchies, right? Really tries to go beyond value systems, by Foss and Klein as well. So there are signals of this as well. These two research directions I think are very promising. I thank you for your attention. That's pretty much where I will end. Please connect with me on those socials, or you can follow me at my YouTube channel, Foresight Wisdom by Alex Fergnani. The references are available upon request. If you're watching this on YouTube, they will also be in the show notes. Thank you very much.